So we'll kind of cover some things and then dive into material pretty quick here. So I realized a lot of you stopping by yesterday. My office hours are going to be busy if people are wanting to review their exam. So my schedule is full as well, which is why I have those office hours carved out to where I can guarantee I'll be available. If 10 to 1 doesn't work for you, I can try to find some time. I'll be honest, I don't have a lot the next week and a half or so. So those office hours are really going to be the time you need to stop by if you want to review your exam, unless you want to do it with my GA or TA, in which case their office hours, I think, are a little bit later in the day. Those would be a good opportunity as well. So if you came yesterday, there's a long line. If you weren't able to kind of hang around, I can still review those with you next week if you want to stop by during office hours. It didn't just have to be this week. I just wanted to kind of reiterate that. Also, I updated grades for the Module 10 reading. So if there are questions like this moving forward, I realized it before class. Some people brought it up to me. I noticed it, but I had to take a little more time to dive into it. When you're looking at these select all questions, let's say that 3 of the questions are correct. Like 3 of the answers are correct. If you answered 2 of them and hit submit, it shows you that those are correct, but that you're still earning 0 points for that question. Okay, so it means that must mean that you selected 2 that were correct. That means that there must be those 2 plus more that are correct, right? So when it's showing you that you got it correct with these green check marks, that just means those are some of the correct answers when you look at these ones that have multiple answers, or say that select all that apply. So don't rifle through your submissions. I think a lot of people did that and try to choose other combinations of the answers. If you already had 2 of them correct, it likely meant that there was still 1 or 2 other answers that were also correct, and you would need to select all of them, right? So I realized that was confusing to some people, right? This is where also don't just rifle through your submissions. If you got through the first 2 and you're still not getting points for that question and you're not sure why, reach out to me. Now it's difficult if you wait until 10:50, the Monday night it's due, right? Because I'm probably not going to be checking my email that late. But if you kind of get working on these early, you can always kind of reach out to me if you're having issues with any of these questions. Given that I think that confused a significant number of people with that select all that apply question, I ended up just giving everybody credit as long as they responded to it. So you might have seen that Module 10 reading score change a little bit, okay? From here on out, though, now that I've described the process, with those select all that apply, it'll show you as though some of your answers are correct if those were part of the correct answers, right? If you got 2 of the 4 that were correct, it'll show you those 2 are correct. That means there must be additional ones that also apply as well, okay? And once again, if you ever have any questions on those top half, you can always reach out to me, which is why starting them earlier rather than later is always good, okay? Other than that, I think that should be all the housekeeping stuff. After class today, you'll kind of see that Module 10 quiz pop up. You'll see the Module 11 reading pop up, both due at the end of the day next Monday. We're kind of back into this kind of routine. CL sessions kind of start back up tonight, covering what we covered this week, Module 10. Any other questions for me before we kind of start with material here? Okay. All right. Easy enough. So we left off last class kind of thinking about this break-even price, right? So we had 2 forms of this profit equation. One was simply taking our total revenues, subtracting our total costs. We rearranged this a little bit and said, what actually represents the exact same thing in these perfectly competitive markets is if we take the quantity and multiply it by the difference between, well, what is price? Price is essentially our per unit revenue, and average total cost is our per unit costs. So if we look at the difference between our per unit revenue and our per unit cost, we multiply that by the number of units. That's essentially another way of representing our profit equation, okay? So we said anytime price is above average total cost, what would be true about this difference? It is, we can't compare these numbers in an equation. If price is above average total cost, this difference would be positive, so my profits are positive. If price ever falls below average total cost, this difference would be negative. My profits are going to be negative, right? So if we're kind of thinking about where would they be equal to 0, right? So not positive or negative, whenever that price exactly hits that minimum point of our average total cost curve. Because we know that these firms make decisions just like we do, where marginal benefit is equal to marginal cost. It's just their marginal benefit has a more specific name now, which is their marginal revenue. So whatever that equilibrium price is in these perfectly competitive markets, that becomes their marginal revenue. If it ever hits the marginal cost curve, where it's exactly equal to average total cost, well, then profits would be equal to what? Price is equal to average total cost. This difference is 0. 0 times anything is 0. Right? So our break-even price, or the point where profits are equal to 0, is where price would be equal to average total cost, right? Which is at that minimum point of our average total cost curve. Or going back to Module 9, we called that point the efficient scale of production. Our per unit costs are at their lowest possible point, okay? That's kind of a refresher on some things we talked about last class, right? So here's our break-even price. So I'm going to build this out for us before we go to the slides. But if we start to think about the graphical representation of this idea, if I'm looking at the firm and I'm thinking about, I've currently got, this is my equilibrium price in the market, that becomes my marginal revenue, okay? I also have, what do I want here? My marginal cost curve, which will look something like this, okay? Now, if I'm at that break-even price, the point where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost must also be the point where marginal revenue, or my equilibrium price, is equal to my average total cost, okay? So with this profit equation in mind, if price ever goes above the average total, minimum point of the average total cost curve, what starts to happen? Well, now my marginal revenue is going to be hitting marginal cost somewhere where price is above average total. So any price above that break-even price, what's true about my profits? Price is above average total, my profits are positive, right? Am I going to want to stay open if my profits are positive? Yeah, right? So that's an easy decision. Now, in the short run, I not only have my average total costs, what do I have in the short run that's non-zero? Fixed costs, right? So I know that I'm also going to have an average variable cost curve that is below my average total costs, okay? Now, if I ever see a price below that break-even price, so I don't know, call this kind of price 3, right? Here, this was hypothetical price 2. Now, marginal revenue is equal to my marginal cost at a point where the price is below average total. So now what's going to be true about profits? They are, price is below average total, my profits are negative. I now have a second decision to make. Can I continue to operate with negative profits for the rest of time? No, right? But in the short run, which is what we have depicted here, right? There's a difference between average total, average variable. It's possible that by staying open, my losses, or these negative profits, are a smaller loss than if I simply shut down. Because if I shut down, what am I still going to have to pay? My fixed costs, right? So it could be that by staying open, my profits will actually be a smaller negative value. Now, what will end up being true, and we'll kind of revisit this in the slides in just a second, but anytime my price is between average, or sorry, below average total, we said profits are negative. As long as that price is above the minimum point of my average variable cost curve, this is kind of like our, what we call shutdown price. Any price above the lowest point of our average variable cost curve, we're going to choose to stay open. We'll be minimizing our losses. If that price ever falls below my average variable cost, so I could think about if price is ever like anywhere down here, well, then price is below my average variable. The optimal decision for the firm is going to be to shut down. Okay. Now we'll look at a little bit more mathematical proof as to why that's the case, but just to kind of put a quick visual to it before we dive a little bit deeper, anytime price is above the minimum point of average total cost, we know profits are positive. If it's below that point, that was our break-even price, profits are negative, we have a second decision to make. Do I stay open or shut down? If price is above the minimum point of average variable costs, I would stay open. If it ever falls below the minimum point of my average variable costs, I choose to shut down. Okay? So this will be kind of the decision-making processes that firms use. So if I think about if I shut down, right, I don't necessarily have to leave the market. So in the short run, I could choose to produce a quantity of 0, in which case we said our profits would simply be our negative fixed costs. Whatever our fixed costs were, even by producing nothing, we still have to pay those. Right? So if you think about like seasonal industries, they do this all the time, right? Ski resorts, like I grew up in Michigan, they're not open during the summer because if they stayed open and they paid their employees, how many people are going to be using the facilities? Nobody. So they're just paying workers. They're just adding costs, where if they just shut down and just paid the fixed cost to like maintain the facilities, they'd actually have lower costs or a lower negative kind of economic profit, right? So we see firms do this all the time, right? Resort towns, depending on if it's seasonal, they might, these restaurants, I grew up in a town where it was like right on Lake Michigan. A lot of the restaurants weren't open during the winter because nobody came up there during the winter, right? They always came during the summer to kind of go swimming in the lake, right? So we see this usually with seasonal businesses, but any firm could make this decision, right? So we kind of have a couple different scenarios, right? So I can have positive economic profits. I can have negative profits, but stay open in the short run to minimize my losses. Or I could have negative profit and it's actually better for me to just simply shut down and pay my fixed costs. So the reason why this is the case, we can actually provide some mathematical support behind. So once again, I won't make you kind of like reproduce all of this. We just want to start out at point A. We have this profit equation, and we're going to get to point B. So in the short run, my average total costs are the sum of what? My average variable and my average fixed. So I just rewrote that, right? Subtracting my average total is the same as subtracting my average variable and average fixed. If I distribute this quantity and I multiply average fixed cost by quantity, what am I left with? Well, how do I find an average? Average fixed cost is my total fixed cost divided by quantity. So if I multiply that by quantity, quantity cancels, I'd just be left with my total fixed costs. So I'm just rewriting that equation here, right? So this equation is the exact same thing as I've got here. I'm just using my equations. I'm substituting equations in for other ones. This is just purely math, okay? Now, this form of the profit equation hopefully will help me kind of see this idea about shutting down. Because if I choose to shut down, right, and I could put some hypothetical values to it here, maybe that'll help, right? So this other form of our profit equation that will help us kind of make these shutdown decisions in the short run, we had price minus average variable minus my fixed costs, okay? So I'll put some numbers to it. So let's say our fixed costs are 500, okay? And let's say, oh, I don't know, I'm producing profit maximizing quantity of 10. If price is above my average variable costs, right? Let's say that hypothetical value is also 10, okay? If I stay open, what are my profits here? 10 times 10 is 100 minus 500 is negative 400. If I shut down, what would my profits be? Well, if I shut down, what is quantity? 0 times anything is. So all I would have is my negative fixed costs. Which of these is better? Losing $500 or losing $400? So if my price is above average variable, this is going to be some positive value. It's better for me to stay open, right? I'll be minimizing my losses by staying open. If price falls below my average variable, well now, even if we keep these the same, if price is below average variable, this might be something like -20, right? We know this difference, if price is below average variable, this difference has to be negative. I'm just choosing a negative value to kind of prove this to you with numbers, right? So now, if I stay open, what would my profits be? 10 times -20 is -200, minus 500 is -700. If I shut down, what does quantity become? If I shut down, I'm producing 0, nothing. 0 times anything is, what would my profits be if I shut down? Just negative whatever my fixed costs are. Which of these is better? Well, losing 500 is better than losing 700. So notice, anytime price is above my average variable, I could use hypothetical values to prove that, oh yeah, this would be positive. Essentially, I'd be lowering my losses by staying open. As long as price is above average variable, this component would be positive. I should remain open. If price ever falls below average variable, now by staying open, I'm just adding another negative value to profits. So my profits, if I stay open, will now just be a larger negative value, or my losses would be higher, right? So this is kind of the mathematical support behind why we know that shutdown decision will work. As long as price is above average variable cost, we should stay open to minimize our losses. And really minimizing losses is another way of saying that I'm maximizing my profits. I'm choosing a lower negative value that's better, right? So we kind of got these three ranges, okay? So if I think about, if I'm just shutting down, we said our costs are negative fixed cost. So it really is going to look something like this. If the price ever is anywhere above that minimum point of my average total cost curve, we said that price would be above average total cost, I would have positive economic profits. If the price is anywhere in this range, price is my marginal revenue, it's going to hit marginal cost somewhere below average total cost, so I know profits would be negative, but it's also going to hit my marginal cost somewhere above average variable, so I know that what would maximize profits if I stay open. Right? So our kind of other range would be if that price falls below the minimum point of average total cost, we know profits are negative. I now have a second decision to make. Do I stay open or shut down to maximize my profits? If price is ever above the minimum point of average variable costs, I know I'm better off staying open. Right? And then if price ever falls below that minimum point of average variable cost, now I know I'm in this scenario where I'd just be adding a larger negative value to my profits. I'm just better off shutting down. Okay? So these are kind of our three ranges. Positive profits, negative profits, and I stay open. Negative profits, and I need to shut down. Okay? Any questions before we keep moving here? Okay? So here's kind of another summary of how you could think about this. We're going to think about these three different ranges and kind of what firms are going to do as a result. Okay? So this is a little bit of a nuance, but I want to add in here as we start to think about moving from the short to the long run. So if the price ever falls below that minimum point of the average variable cost curve, we said the firm should choose to do what? Price is below average variable cost. I just said we should. So what would I be producing? 0. So what is the firm's short run supply curve? For any price below what, like 2.2 here, the quantity they choose would actually be 0. So we don't have like this nice continuous supply curve, right? It actually starts out at 0 and then kind of jumps to producing something as soon as that price hits average variable cost and goes above that. Now, same kind of idea. As the price continues to rise, just like before, I'll choose to produce a higher and higher optimal quantity or profit maximizing quantity. So when we're thinking about market supply is just adding up at every price what the total quantity in the market is, or how much is each firm producing times the number of firms. So I get a little bit lazy before we get to this chapter when I'm writing out market supply. And sometimes I'll start out like thinking about market supply, I'll just draw it out from this point. Technically, as long as we have some kind of variable costs, the price at which the first firm would choose to produce or provide this unit to the market will be somewhere above 0. So our supply curve is always going to start out somewhere here, right? We won't see that first unit provided by any firm until the price is above that average variable costs, okay? So when we start to think about this connection between the market supply and firm supply, market supply is just taking every firm in that industry, adding up what their individual supply is, okay? So we know that there's going to be prices where they choose not to produce anything or they're shutting down, right? They're not staying open, okay? Any questions on that idea? Okay. All right. So we're going to now try to make this connection between the market and the firm's decisions, okay? So if I've got market or industry supply, that really just goes back to the market supply curve we were talking about all the way back in module 3, okay? So we're going to start to think about what does this market supply curve look like and how does that relate to the firm's decision, okay? Excuse me. So as we're trying to get to the long run, we'll first kind of want to understand how the short run is working, okay? So I've got a bunch of slides in here where we start to think about firm entry and exit. I'll kind of talk through this, and then I'm going to draw these graphs out for you, but then we'll kind of revisit the graphs that are in the slide. They're just kind of like a summary. Let's assume we start out, and the price is currently above the average total cost. I know profits would be what? Positive. If there's positive profits in an industry, are firms going to want to enter that market? Yes, right? Positive economic profits would be a good thing. More firms will enter that market. As more firms enter the market, what's going to happen? We have more producers. More producers will do what to our market? Increase our supply curve. As supply increases, what does that do to the equilibrium price? It starts to lower it. So price was above average total cost, profits were positive, firms entered, it starts to push the price down. It gets closer and closer to average total cost until profits are 0. Now, is there any incentive for a firm to enter that market? No, because if they do, as soon as they enter, what happens to the price? It goes a little bit, now profits are negative, right? Now, in the short run, we might stay open to minimize our losses, but in the long run, what goes away? Our fixed costs, right? So if we start to think about long-run decision-making by these firms, what does their profit equation become? So even if we were kind of still thinking about this other form of our profit equation, oh, sorry, not average. Here's fixed costs. In the long run, what do fixed costs become? In the long run, average variable cost is the same as what? So we're back to that same kind of equation we were looking at last class, right? So we know anytime price is above that average total cost and we have positive profits, firms are going to enter that market. Now, as they enter, they push the price down. Eventually, they're going to cause profits to become negative. Now we would have some firms choosing to exit that market, right? So the point where we'll kind of see them stop is when profits are 0, there's now no longer incentive for a firm to enter. There's no longer any incentive for a firm to exit, right? So that will be kind of our long run, is that even if we start out with positive profits, firms enter until they push the price down to where profits are equal to 0. We could do the reverse thought experiment. Let's assume that we started out and the price was below our average total costs. Well, eventually over time, if price is below average total and there's negative profits, what are some firms going to choose to do? Exit that market. As they exit, we have fewer producers. Supply is going to decrease. Decreases in supply do what to the equilibrium price? Increase it. So price was below our average total. As firms exit, the price starts to go up until profits are equal to 0, right? Price is equal to average total cost, and we now end up in this scenario where profits are 0 again. So it doesn't matter where we start out, as long as we have free firm entry and exit, We know that firms will enter and exit this market until profits are driven to zero. When economic profits are zero, there's no incentive to enter. There's no incentive to exit, right? So this is kind of our long-run equilibrium, okay? Any questions just on the intuition here? I'll give you guys some depictions of this, okay? So what is this going to look like, right? So we're going to stack these graphs side by side and think about, here's my market, here's my firm. Okay, so here's kind of the market quantity. Here's that market price. I've got my supply curve. I've got my demand curve. Here's that initial equilibrium price, which becomes the firm's marginal revenue. Okay, so let's think about a scenario where initially, here's my marginal costs, right? And let's say my average total cost curve is down here, okay? Where's the profit max? So the quantity in the market will be right here. The optimal quantity of the firm is where what? Marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. We should have this like tattooed on ourselves before the next exam, right? So the quantity of the firm is going to be right here. At that quantity, what is true about the price relative to our average total cost? Price is greater than our average total cost. So here, this would be the value of our profits. Profits are what? Price is above average total cost, they're positive. Okay. So what's going to happen if we have positive profits? Firms are going to enter. What does that do to my supply curve? Increases it, right? If I have more firms at the same price, at every price, no matter what the price was, I'd be say essentially, how would I find market supply? Take the quantity each firm is producing, multiply that by the number of firms. That's why when we have more firms, market supply increases, right? So here, I can think about, I'm going to try to get this where I want it to be. See if I can draw this shift correct. So market supply increases until that new equilibrium price which is now the firm's marginal revenue. Now where does marginal revenue equal marginal cost? At this point, which is a lower quantity, but now price is also equal to my average total cost. So now profits are equal to what? So once again, maybe having this in front of us for the entire class period will help. But if this is a form of our profit equation, if price is equal to average total cost, this difference is, if I take something and subtract it from itself, that difference is 0. 0 times anything is 0, right? So if we start out with positive profits, firms will enter this market, driving the price down to when profits are now equal to 0. Now there's no incentive for any other firm to join this industry, okay? Any questions on anything here? So this is kind of a counterintuitive result, and it gets a little bit tricky, right? What happened to the quantity that each firm produces? It went down, but what happened to the quantity we see in the market? It went up, right? So this is the idea that when more firms join this market, it becomes more saturated, right? So I now have a smaller market share percent, but I could still see the quantity in the industry go up, even though each firm is now producing less than before. Simple thought experiment, 10 firms, all producing 10 units, total market quantity would be 10 firms, each producing 10 units, total market quantity would be 100. I now see more firms enter. I have 20 firms, but each firm is only producing 8 units. So each firm is now producing less, but 20 times 8 would now be 160. Market supply would be higher, right? So it's kind of this counterintuitive result, that when we see firms enter the market, market quantity goes up, even though the quantity each firm produces, the profit maximizing quantity will now be a little bit lower. I see a hand up. Okay. Any questions on this before we keep moving? Okay. So I'll kind of give you another one. It's just the exact opposite. So you hopefully could do this on your own, but this is why I'm here, right? To kind of help assist you kind of thinking about these different directional changes. So if I've got the quantity and price in the market, I start out with some supply and demand curve. Here's my equilibrium market price. Here's that market quantity. This is the firm's marginal revenue. And I want to start out with a scenario now. Here's the firm's marginal costs. Here's their average total costs. Okay. Where is the profit maximizing quantity for the firm? Where marginal revenue is equal to, everyone should say it in unison. I was hoping for a real nice moment there. Marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue, right? So the firm is going to choose a profit maximizing quantity right here. Now, what's true about that price relative to average total cost? It is less than. So if price is below average total cost, my profits are what? Negative. So I could even identify the value of those negative profits using this rectangle. Okay, we did that kind of last class. If there's negative profits, what do firms start to do? Over time, I can't hemorrhage money forever. So some firms will choose to exit. What happens to our supply curve? Fewer producers, our supply will decrease, right? So if I have this decrease in my supply curve, what does that do to my equilibrium price? Increases it. The equilibrium price now becomes the firm's marginal revenue curve, right? Where does marginal revenue now equal marginal cost? Right at that minimum point of our average total cost curve. So the quantity that each firm produces has went up, right? But firms will continue to exit until price is exactly equal to that minimum point of our average total cost curve. So profits are now what? Price is equal to average total cost. Our profits are now zero, right? Now, what has happened to the quantity in the market? Once again, kind of this counterintuitive result. When we have negative profits, firms start to exit the market. Well, that means that the remaining firms now will have a larger market share, right? So even though the quantity in the market is going down, the remaining firms, each one will actually now be producing a little bit more than they were before. Okay? Same kind of thing that we had going on here, just the opposite direction, right? So whether profits start out as positive or they start out as negative, firm entry and exit will push them to this point where they're then equal to zero. Okay? Any questions on that idea before we keep moving? Yeah. Yep, if profits are zero, that's our break-even price or our break-even point. Right? Any other questions? Okay. So what do we got? 15. Okay, perfect. So, I have some depictions of this in the slides. It's really what I just drew out for us here. But if I start out with positive profits, firms will enter that market, increasing the supply curve. As they enter, that pushes down the equilibrium price until we get to this point where price is now equal to our average total cost, or at that minimum point of our average total cost curve. Profits would now be zero. Yeah. So we're talking about economic profits, right? So if you want to frame it in this way, when I look at the books, the accounting profits were likely going to, for these firms, be positive. But what that means is I could not take all of my resources Economic profits would say there's no other option where I could use my same resources and make more money than I currently am, right? So there's zero economic profits, we have to remember. So when I'm earning zero economic profits, I'm likely earning positive accounting profits, because what that means is whatever I'm currently making, there's no other industry I could take all of my workers, all of my raw materials, all my resources, and make more money. Yep. So as they enter, we said this pushes us down to where we see zero economic profits, to your question. Yep. And then if we have negative profits, we said firms are going to do what? In the long run, exit that market. Some of them will start to exit. As some firms begin to exit, that pushes our equilibrium price up until we get to this point where economic profits are equal to zero. We would call that our long run equilibrium. There's now no longer any incentive for any firm to enter or exit this market, which is one of the huge assumptions we had last class about these perfectly competitive markets. We only get to this long run equilibrium where profits are zero if firms can enter and exit this market freely, right? If we're locked into contracts, we can't exit the market, then we won't have a perfectly competitive industry, right? We might not see profits equal zero. If the government has regulations that don't allow me to sell food unless I like pay for some type of a permit to like sell from a food truck, well, now I have these additional costs imposed by the government, price ceilings, price floors. That would move us away from these perfectly competitive markets. We're assuming I can freely enter. I could just choose to join. I could choose to produce this good. I could enter or exit this market without any regulations that get in my way or without any additional fees that get in my way. Okay. And if that's the case, we kind of get this nice long run outcome, which is profits get driven to zero by firm entry and exit. We end up seeing the price be the very smallest or minimum point of the average total cost curve. And here I've kind of got something that I'm revisiting that we probably go back to module 9. I have a short run average total cost and a long run average total cost. So remember, I'm going to skip ahead here a bit. We're going to ignore this stuff. Our long run average total cost, remember we said in the short run I might be locked into a certain production facility, but I could move to different production facilities over time. So we're thinking about in the long run, not only are we going to be choosing the optimal profit maximizing quantity where it's at the minimum point of our average total cost curve in the short run, we're also going to change all of our fixed factors of production so that we also end up on that lowest possible short run average total cost curve. So in the long run, everything's equal. The equilibrium price is the firm's marginal revenue. Their optimal decision is where marginal revenue is then equal to marginal cost. We must be at zero profits, so that's where the marginal cost hits my average total cost curve at its minimum point. Everything is equal in the long run. Okay? So this would be kind of our long run depiction of these firms. Okay? Any questions on this idea before we keep moving? So I'm going to skip through these slides and we're not going to talk about them in class. I'll give the intuition behind what's going on here, but I'm then going to do something when we get to the in-class quiz that will kind of revisit this, right? So just to save some time. But I do want to describe, we've talked about firm entry and exit can impact the equilibrium price. What other shifts in the market are going to impact the equilibrium price? Shifts in supply we talked about, but shifts in demand, right? So let's say all of a sudden a product becomes more attractive. You know, all of a sudden everybody wants to buy these Labobos or whatever the hell they are, right? Right? It made me sound like I'm 60. But, right? There's a huge demand increase. What's going to happen to the firms that are producing that good? Price is going, if a demand increase, price is going to go up. Price is now above average total cost. There are positive economic profits. So that demand increase, what is it going to cause? Well, if economic profits are now positive, in response to that demand increase, what do firms do? Enter the market that shifts our supply curve or increases it, which does what? Pushes the price back down until we're at zero economic profits. So these short run demand shifts, all of a sudden, all these companies will start producing this good or knockoffs of it or mimicking it. But as more firms do that, initial short run profits that were positive will get driven back down to zero. So the end result is the same. Even if we have these short run changes in demand, firm entry and exit will always push us back down to profits being equal to zero, right? This is why like Temu exists, right? They mimic everything, essentially pushing that price back down to zero. Okay. But we won't focus on some of the more intricacies of this model. This is something I stole from like an intermediate micro course. But I wanted to explain the intuition, and we'll look at a graph on one of the in-class quiz questions. Okay. So I now want to focus a little bit more on this idea of movements in the long, like movements towards that long run. So let's say I'm currently in the short run and I'm kind of locked into a certain size production facility. Okay. So there's no changes in the market now, right? I'm thinking about, and here I'll make an extreme example and then I'll probably like walk it back a little bit. So let's say I've got the current equilibrium price, and this is my marginal revenue of the firm, right? And let's say that right now, here's my marginal costs, here's my average total costs, okay? So where's the optimal profit maximizing quantity where marginal revenue is equal to marginal costs? But what is true about price relative to my average total cost here? Price is below, right? So here, this would be profits, but my profits are negative, okay? So maybe in the short run, I'm somewhere like up here. And given the current price, if I'm operating on this short run average total cost curve, my profits are negative. So if I am able to identify something that no other firm can, that changes the efficiency of my production process. So this could be as like dumb as that everybody is buying these huge plots of land, building a rectangular production facility, and I realize if I can find land where it's actually longer, my production process is more efficient if it is like a narrower building just by the like sheer time it takes to like move things around this building. Could be something like that. Could be I identify that, I don't know, some material of paper is better than what people are currently using. If I can figure something out though, that lowers my cost structure, right? That somehow I've identified a fixed factor of production. It was something that was fixed currently. I might not be able to change it overnight, but over the next few years, I could start to move towards this different production process that would lower my costs. Well, if I'm the only firm that does that, there's no more or fewer firms in the market. The equilibrium price doesn't change at all, right? But what have I done? My new profit maximizing quantity will be where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue. At this new optimal quantity, what is true about price relative to average total cost? My price is now above average total cost. So now all of this would represent profits, but if price is above average total cost, my profits are now positive. If I can change my cost structure, if I can change one of these fixed factors of production to move to a lower cost curve, if the market continues to do what it's doing, nobody else identifies this one thing that could change their costs. Maybe people were currently earning negative, every firm was earning negative profits, but if I'm the only firm that identifies this fixed factor I could change, what have I now done? I'm earning positive economic profits, right? So this is why companies spend so much money in research and development, right? Or even they'll put so much money, like there's like people that literally will like go to these production facilities and like look at just like I said, it'll be simple things of like, this person who's doing part A and part B, are they back to back? And that's less efficient than if they're facing each other. There will literally be like efficiency managers who try to identify these things because if they can, the company can move to a lower cost structure. And even if that current market price is the same, they could go from having negative profits to now positive profits. Now, once they do this, what do you think everybody else tries to do? As long as like it's not private information, they copy it. Now everybody's cost structure is the same. The price moves back down, right? And then we kind of think about, okay, everybody starts to change this fixed factor and we just move lower down that long run average total cost curve, right? So in the long run, if we talk about an infinite amount of time, everyone has discovered everything that could improve efficiency, and we end up on this lowest possible short run average total cost curve. Now, this wouldn't be a perfectly competitive market if I had information about something that could lower my costs, but I somehow can protect it and not allow other people to know. Like I have this is something top secret at my production. It doesn't have to make it publicly available, right? So as long as these companies can protect their like individual production processes, they potentially, no other firm can mimic it. They could be earning positive profits while everybody else is still earning negative profits. But if there's perfect information in a perfectly competitive market, firms know everything everyone's doing, we still get driven back down to this point where everyone's mimicking each other's cost structures and profits go all the way back down to zero. Okay. So I'm trying to give a little bit more like like this is probably stuff Kelly likes to talk about, right? We're thinking about kind of the big picture of what companies are trying to do. Okay. Any questions on this idea before we keep moving? So I had a small typo on this slide. I think these both said MC1 before I started class. This one should say MC2. I'll re-upload the slides to have this correction. But let's think about, it doesn't have to be that profits go from negative to positive. What did I depict in this first scenario where marginal cost 1, average total cost 1? Profits would be what here? Well, marginal cost, it's marginal revenue, right at the minimum point of average total cost, so profits are 0. But if I can then do something that changes my cost structure, let's say like, somebody discovers some inventor comes up with some new product. What happens to the cost of this industry? Maybe it is lower. So when my marginal cost and average total cost curve decrease, right, the market supply and demand initially after this, nothing's happened. So that equilibrium price is still $4, but now that I can face this new lower cost structure, what will happen is my firm will choose a higher quantity than it was before, and my profits might go from being 0 to now, positive. Okay, so this is just kind of a different depiction, less extreme than the one I drew out for you, where instead of going from negative to positive profits, we're just starting out if we were at this equilibrium point and then something changed for every firm, right? So let's say it wasn't just one firm, but we were currently like in a long run equilibrium where profits were 0. All of a sudden we discover that there's this, somebody comes up with an invention that now we can have, the same amount of gasoline, but we can get even more miles per gallon in automobiles, right? Or I can do something where it lowers the cost of whatever my production process is. We don't have to have a specific example. Well, now we were all currently at profits of 0. If every firm now can face a lower cost structure, in the short run, what can happen to profits? They now become positive. What happens in the long run? Now that this new invention is out there, profits are positive. What will all firms now do? Well, if there's positive profits, firms start to enter that market, supply increases, pushes the price down until profits are 0. So we can see positive, negative short-run profits, but as long as we have firm entry and exit, even when we have demand changes or we see cost changes to the firm, in the long run, this firm entry and exit will always push us to this profit of 0. Okay. So I kind of put some conclusions up here, but basically the idea is like, it doesn't matter kind of what the marginal cost, it doesn't matter if we see short run changes in demand or long run changes in demand even. Firm entry and exit will always push us to this point where in a perfectly competitive market, our profits are equal to 0, right? So that's kind of where we end the story, so to speak, okay? Any questions over anything I went through? If I went through something too quick, anyone have questions or anything, we'll jump kind of the in-class quiz here in a second. Okay, so let's do, I think I have this, let's make sure, I think it's 17.65. We'll make sure I've got that number right. It's not 6.5. It's 15.72, sorry. So I'll get this published here in just a second, but that number to get in will be 15.72. There might be some Wi-Fi issues. We've got plenty of time to where it'll eventually start working based off my last section. So I'll get this kind of published. 15.72 is that code you need to get into that quiz. That should now be showing up shortly here on the home page under the quizzes tab. Okay, so 15.72. So it might take some time. We'll kind of talk through these. I'll leave it open so we'll have plenty of time to kind of get it answered. Okay. All right, so. All right, so question one. All right, so this is where I said I kind of skipped over some of those other slides. I wanted to go a little bit more in depth into showing you a question that I could ask you on the quiz, or I could ask you like on an exam. Saw a couple heads pop up there, right? So let's assume I've got a perfectly competitive market. I've got 10 firms. Current profits are 0. Okay. For whatever reason, I see an increase in the demand for this product. Okay. What's going to happen to my short run profits and what's going to happen to the quantity each firm produces? Okay. So the way that we would model this, if I was told that currently profits are equal to 0, and I've got changes in the market. So I want to make this connection between the firm's decision, what quantity it produces, and the quantity and the price in the market. So I'm going to start out just thinking about, okay, this market has some equilibrium point. So here's my equilibrium price. For the firm, that's going to be their what? The equilibrium price is the firm's marginal revenue. Okay. So here's the firm's marginal revenue. Now, if I start out with 0 profits, what's the next thing? Someone here, are there any questions? Are we good? We're just taking time to get into the quiz. Are people panicking? We still have a lot of time left. So is that, who is not into the quiz yet? There's a couple handfuls. We'll probably take the next 15 minutes to go through this. I'm guessing all of us will be able to get in kind of by the end there. And it's what, 15.72 was that number. So if it helps, write that down. So when it does pop up and be available, you can get that entered in. Okay. So if I'm at 0 profits, I know that the point at which my marginal cost curve is hitting marginal revenue, that is going to be the profit maximizing quantity for the firm. So what must be true if profits are 0? That at this point, that equilibrium price is equal to what? Average total cost. Remember our profit equation, quantity times price minus average total cost. So if this quantity, this optimal quantity is something, the only way profits are 0 is if price is exactly equal to my average total cost here. Okay? So I know that I started out in a place like this. Okay? Now, if I have an increase in the demand for this product, what's going to shift? So this is where I said the exam, and I got questions about this from a lot of people who stopped my office yesterday, and I know I said this, and I don't talk just to hear myself talk. What is the final over? Every single module? No, it's over the last 4 modules, right? So it's not cumulative in the sense I'm not going back and asking you the same types of questions that we have for module 2, 5, 7. But what am I asking you about here? If I see a demand increase, which way am I shifting demand? To the right. So I still need to know how to do some of these things that we've talked about. It's almost like I need to know even more now, right? So I see this demand increase, right? As I see this increase in demand, what's happened to the equilibrium price? It's went up, right? That price now is that firm's new marginal revenue. How do they choose the profit maximizing quantity? Where marginal revenue is equal to marginal costs. So the quantity that each firm is going to produce initially from this demand increase, every firm is going to produce a little bit more in the short run. Okay? So this is a little bit more intuitive. When we have demand increases, what happened to the quantity in the market? Well, the quantity in the market went up. All of the existing firms, we previously had zero profits. We now see that every firm after this demand increase is now going to choose to produce a higher quantity, which results in a higher quantity in the market as well. Okay. So each firm is now going to produce at a higher quantity. And what's true about profits? Well, initially, we said profits were equal to what? Yeah, price was equal to average total cost, so profits were equal to 0. Now, what's true about my price relative to where I'm at my average total cost curve? Price is now above. Remember, price is our marginal revenue. So if price is above average total cost, my profits after this demand change or increase are now positive. Okay? So my profits have done what? Went from 0 to positive, so they increased, and the quantity each firm produces would increase. We could also do a similar thing on a question. So this is where people ask me, where can I find more questions? My advice is usually to create your own from the ones I'm giving you. What could I very easily do with a similar question like this? What if demand decreased? And I should be able to reproduce this model as well, right? This is how you should be solving every question that you get like this on the exam. If you try to think through this in your mind, I would easily probably make mistakes doing it, right? This is why I draw things out when I explain them to you, right? Because this is like the solution as to why those correct answers are what they are, that we see profits increase and the quantity each firm increases, okay? Any questions on that before we keep moving? We're okay with this one? How many people still aren't into the quiz? Everybody in? So we got like one. So hopefully over the next minute or two, we'll kind of get back in. But that first question, right? We see profits increase and the quantity each firm produces increases, okay? So just as a follow-up, this isn't a question on the in-class quiz. If profits are now positive, what's going to happen? Firms will enter the market. As firms enter, what happens to supply? It increases. In fact, I didn't leave myself enough room here, but it would increase until we get back to whatever that old equilibrium price was, and profits get driven back down to 0. So usually on these questions, I'll keep those two kind of things separate, but we could kind of continue. And those are the slides I skipped. They kind of combine them. I don't want to get too confusing. And I'll only ever kind of ask you like firm entry or exit or demand increase or decrease. Don't kind of combine the two. But you could, I mean, in practice, in the real world, like that's what you would be doing, right? You would see we have these demand changes. How did firms respond? And then after that, how did firms respond in terms of entry and exit? What did that push our price back down to? Or you know, if we have multiple changes going on at the same time, this becomes a little more complicated, okay? All right, before we move on to the next question, we're okay with this? All right, so I think the next thing I did was very similar to something I already drew out for us, but I want to hone in on a couple key things, okay? So let's say firms are able to identify something that lowers their marginal costs and consequently their average total costs, okay? So let's kind of think about this connection between the market and the firm. So I've got the quantity of the firm. I've got the quantity and the price of this market, okay? So I've got my supply curve. I've got my demand curve. Here's my equilibrium price. That is the firm's what? Marginal revenue, right? So if we were initially at a point, and here's where I'll kind of draw it out, trying to make it easy. Let's say they start out making 0 profits, right? So I've got my marginal cost curve here. I've got my average total costs, that profit maximizing quantity, price is equal to average total costs. So my profits would be equal to 0, okay? If I'm able to do something that lowers my cost structure, right? Well, I've lowered my marginal and average total costs. So maybe now they look something like this. What's the new profit maximizing quantity where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue, right? Now, what's happened in the short run? So initially, I've seen that each firm is going to choose to produce more, right? And if I asked you about short run profits, they have went from 0. Well, if now price is above average total cost, my profits are now what? Positive. But those are my short run profits, right? The question is asking us, I believe, about long run profits. So in the long run, what's going to happen? If there's short run positive profits, firms will enter. Let's see if I can get this to line up. So as firms enter this market, actually, I'll call this supply 3. I know we don't have supply 2, but just to kind of keep the numbers lined up. As firms enter, right, what happens to supply? It increases. So our new equilibrium price, I'll just call this 3, just because I used 2 to identify the change in the cost initially. So the second thing that happened initially, we started out at 1. Cost of the firms, they found a way to lower them. In response to that, 0.3, firms entered that market. As they did that, this now becomes marginal revenue. But notice, it's where is the new equilibrium price and the new cost structure of the firm. So now where does marginal revenue equal marginal cost? At this quantity here. So whether I asked you about the short or the long run, if we can lower our costs, notice what happens to quantity. It increases a lot in the short run, but then as firms enter, I now am getting like a smaller slice of the pie. So I'm still going to see that in the long run, after we have this like cost structure change, we can identify a way to lower our costs. Each firm is still going to produce more, just not as much more as they were in the short run. And the reason why I know this is like my new long run equilibrium is because now what are profits after firms entered this market? They get driven down to 0, right? So in the long run, even if we have demand changes or we have changes to that firm's cost structure, that might produce positive profits in the short run. But in the long run, in response to those changes, we know we're going to have firm entry and exit that drive our long run profits back down to 0. Okay? So that second question, we're looking at what? In the short run, the quantity each firm produces will go up. In fact, we said we could look at it here. The quantity each firm produces, or even in the long run, it went up. But in the long run, profits didn't increase. Profits actually remained at 0, or even if they started as positive, in the long run, we know they're always going to get driven to 0. Okay? Any questions kind of over either one of those here? I hear a lot of murmurings. So we have any questions over either one of these here? We're okay with this? Okay. All right. So we'll get out of this. So I have this file up under module 10, and it's an Excel file, right? So this is where I'm trying to sprinkle some more data towards the end of the semester into this class. I mean, if you want to be in Kelly, and I've gotten an earful from a lot of you, I know that a lot of you really, really want to be into Kelly after the recent grades came out, right? And so you're going to be expected to work with data. So this is why every Canvas discussion has like a very minimal, like you're at least looking at a table or something like that. So next week we'll have the next Canvas discussion after we talk about monopolies. So we'll get kind of another taste of that. You'll be working with some data. Here I wanted to show you, we can start to build these firms' cost structures, no matter what firm we're looking at, in a document or in a program like Excel, right? So if I have kind of my firm and I've got different quantities here, My marginal revenue is simply this value, which is I'm putting the price of the good in here. I started out at 225. Okay. Now my total revenue should simply be what? The price I'm selling the good for multiplied by the quantity. Right. I also, if I'm looking at total costs, how do I find my average total cost? I would take my total costs and divide them by quantity, right? So I'm using all of those cost formulas to like build this table out. I just had to give you what the total cost and what the prices were. Now I know this is a depiction of a firm in what? The short or long run? And how do I know it? So it's going to be in the short run, because what is not zero? If I produce nothing and I still have costs, those would have to be fixed costs. So I know I'm in the short run. Now, it's kind of nice here. I have like this reference point. If I shut down, produce nothing, what are my profits? Just negative, whatever my fixed costs are. Now, in Excel, the way these negative values are displayed to us, when it puts parentheses around, that's telling me it's a negative value. Okay? So all of these with parentheses, these are all negative values. So notice, when the price is something like, we'll do 2 here just to make the kind of point. What's the minimum point of my average variable cost curve? So if I look through these values, I identified it with this highlighter. It's 2.225. So if the price ever falls below that minimum point of the average variable cost, what should be true about profits? Well, first of all, if it's below my average variable, it has to be below my average total, so profits should be negative. But if price ever falls below average variable, what should I choose to do? Shut down. Or there's no quantity that would actually produce a smaller negative value than if I had a quantity of 0. So when the price is something like 2, notice every single production, like quantity value, the losses are all greater than -6. So my profits are actually maximized by producing nothing. Losing $6 is better than losing any amount higher than that. Okay? Now, what if I had something like, I want one that's exactly here. So let's say 2.8. Well, right. So that's above the lowest point of my average variable cost, but it's below the minimum point of my average total. So profits should still be, price is below average total, so they should still be negative. But if it's above that minimum point of average variable, it should be there is a quantity that exists where I could actually be earning a higher profit value than simply shutting down. Or in this case, I'd be losing an amount lower than $6, right? So if the price was 2.8, I kind of recompute my profits here. Notice, all right, where would marginal cost be equal to marginal revenue of 2.8? Right here. Okay, my profits are -1.4. That's better than -6. I should stay open. I'd be minimizing my losses, choosing this profit maximizing quantity if the price ever is anywhere in between that minimum point of my average variable and my average total cost curve. And I could prove that to myself if I choose any value in that range. 2.5, sure enough, the highest possible profit is -3.8. That's better than -6, right? Now, if it ever falls back down below the minimum point of my average variable cost, now there's no value that's better than just losing $6. Now, what happens if the price is something like 3.5? Well, price is now above that minimum point of my average total costs. So I now know that profit should be positive, right, at the profit maximizing quantity. So notice, that doesn't mean that every production level my profits will be positive. When price is above the minimum point of my average total cost, that's just telling me at the profit maximizing quantity, profits will be positive. So if I produce at quantities where marginal cost is not equal to my marginal revenue, I still have negative profits. But if I go up to the point where marginal cost looks like I'm in between these two values here, so this is where maybe to make one that makes a little more sense, let's do 3.9 just so I can have one specific value. So marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue right here at a quantity of 10. That's where my profits are maximized. 8.5, I now have positive profits because the price is above that minimum point of my average total cost curve. Now, once again, that doesn't mean that at every quantity, profits are positive. It's that at the profit maximizing quantity, my profits are not positive. Okay. So we can prove these concepts we're talking about to ourselves with actual numbers. We could get total revenue, total cost information from data sets for a variety of different companies that exist out there and actually determine what their current profits are, right? Now, if we determine that there was, these costs, I'm assuming I've captured all economic costs here, right? When I actually look at accounting, like the books, you usually don't see them put in implicit cost. They just have the explicit cost there, right? So it's a little bit different if we're kind of talking about this, like looking at the actual values for firms, because it's likely that when you look at the books or their kind of accounting, you're not going to see their implicit cost of what they could be earning if they took all of their resources, put them towards a different industry. Although, a lot of these companies internally are definitely doing that, right? You can imagine, like if I'm a company that buys out, like who did I just see? I drive by these storage places, and it's like Cube Smart or something was just bought out by Smart Storage. They didn't even replace the signs. They just put like a banner over it. It's one major company, and they figured out, well, buying this company in Bloomington with our resources provides a higher economic, like they factored in the implicit costs if they bought out this company in this specific geographical area versus another. So on the back end, like if you're actually working internally in these companies, they're definitely looking at the economic profits. It's just when we look at the actual reported values of costs and revenues, those are generally only going to be reporting the explicit costs, right? But if we're in the company, our costs should be including all of those implicit costs as well. Okay? So this is just what we were looking at graphically, kind of put in a table form. Next week, we'll start talking about not perfectly competitive markets. We'll look at monopoly markets, kind of using perfectly competitive markets as our baseline. So you'll have that module 10 quiz, module 11 reading due at the end of the day, Monday. Other than that, have a fun, safe weekend, and I will see you guys on Tuesday.